Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Conservation Conversations. My name is Ana Sangronis, and I'm the co-host of this webinar series, along with Ed Pritchard of Miami Eco Adventures. And this webinar series is a collaborative effort between UF IFAS Extension, Florida Sea Grant, and Miami-Dade County Parks Eco Adventures Unit. We hold these webinars every second Wednesday of the month at 6 p.m., and we are currently scheduled to go through May of this year. If you would like to receive an email disclaiming or telling you what the topic is, along with the registration link, you can let us know in the chat box. And likewise, follow us on social media where we publish the schedule twice a year. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent out within the next week. Everyone in the webinar is currently muted with your video cameras off, and we ask that you remain this way and utilize the chat box to put any questions you have for our guest speaker. Now I'm going to turn the microphone over to our esteemed presenter, Dr. Frank Ridgley of Zoo Miami.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Anna. I'm glad to be here talking to you all. My name is Dr. Frank Ridgley. If you don't know, I head up the Conservation and Research Department at Zoo Miami, and I'm a wildlife veterinarian by training, but most of the time now I kind of work on endangered species recovery programs. So it's a pleasure to talk to you all this evening. I hope you all had a good day at work and are now kind of relaxing at home. And we're going to talk a little bit about our bats that are our neighbors down here in South Florida, especially in Miami-Dade County. So I hope you will be able to learn a lot about them and maybe what you can do to help us conserve them. So we do a lot of bat conservation projects at Zoo Miami, and we're going to give you a little peek into some of them. So the bat species that are found in Miami-Dade County, there are actually about 8 of them normally found within the county. And then we have what are called 7 accidental species. So 8 normal ones that you can expect to find at any one time. And then these accidental ones are kind of sometimes blown in on storms or very weird events. The 3 northern species actually haven't been found for almost like 50 years in Florida. So you would never really expect to find them. But the tropical ones can show up in Miami-Dade County every once in a while, especially with hurricanes. And you can see some of the pictures of the nectar and floridanus bats there on that clip. And also, if you don't know, all bats in Florida are actually protected by state law. So it's illegal to do anything to them. You can't poison them. You can't introduce something to really disturb them. All you can do is outside of the maternity season. So when they have pups present outside of that season, you can do what's called an exclusion. And those pictures on the left-hand part of your screen are exclusion devices. They're like one-way devices. The adult bats can get out, but they can't get back in. And that's the humane way to get them out of a structure if you've got bats where you don't want them to be. But during April, like 15th to August 15th, that's when most of our bats here in South Florida are having their babies. And so we don't want you to have the adults get to where they get out and then they can't get back into their babies. So they're especially protected during that time of the year, during the summer, that you must take care not to bother them. So I want you to meet your neighbors. So your neighbors down here, one we have is our smallest bat, called the tricolored bat. It used to be called the Eastern pipistrelle. I kind of like that name better, the pipistrelle. It's fun to say. It's a tiny, tiny little bat. Sometimes people mistake it for moths, actually, when they see it flying around. Not really that common in South Florida. As you go further and further north, it'll become more and more common. I was in Hillsborough County doing bat work, and there was quite a few of these little guys flying around that we detected. But down here, I only detect them every once in a while, and usually just a single individual. And these guys are special, though, because they just got put on the federal endangered species list. So the ones that are actually in Florida that don't go through hibernation as much, they may be the savior for the species, because this fungus called white nose syndrome has wiped out most of them throughout the eastern part of the United States. So our Florida ones became very important, even though they're in low numbers. Our next bat is called the Seminole Bat. It's got kind of this burgundy wine coat with frosted tips. These are solitary bats. I think people tend to think of bats all together in groups and colonies, but these guys actually are solitary. The only time you're going to see more than one of them together is if a mom has pups. And they can have 1 to 4 pups every summer. And they love, love, love Spanish moss. So if you have lots of live oaks with Spanish moss, you may have these guys tucked up inside there. And that's where they like to roost during the day, and they'll make a little bed with the Spanish moss and wrap it around them. But they also like natural areas more than cities, so you don't see them as much in the middle of the city. Now this bat, the northern yellow bat, you actually will see in the city. It's a beautiful little bat. I say it's, you know, this fuzzy blonde. It's pretty common in the urban setting, and very closely related to the Seminole bat. They are also solitary, and a big thing with them is they roost in sagging palm fronds, whether they're dead ones or ones that are kind of just sagging and are going to die soon. That's where they like to go. So palm trees all over the city, you know, down here, lots of times people in the summertime will describe they're sitting by their pool and they've got palm trees in the backyard, and they'll see a bat drop out from a palm tree, take a drink on their pool and take off, and it often surprises them. And it's usually this guy. And sometimes when this bat gets into the light, people will swear that they've seen a white bat because it's this light blonde color and goes under a light. They might see it and think it's white. Here's a good picture of kind of perfect habitat, right? These palms are tall, they have those skirts, and these types of bats just love those areas there. And this is an example of a baby one on the right, roosting up in a dead palm frond. So when mom goes out, she has to leave her babies up there too. So this is a reason to not trim your palms. They will tell you also at like the IFAS extension office that trimming palms is not really healthy for palm trees. If you can, just let the palm fronds fall naturally, or and just kind of leave them alone. And especially during the summer, if these guys have babies up in there, you should just leave your palms alone. Pick up the palm fronds when they fall, because you're destroying bat habitat actually, and it's not good for the tree. So I swear I didn't make up these names. I think some of these biologists don't have that much imagination, because this is literally called the big brown bat. And there's actually a little brown bat in another part of the country, but I guess it's descriptive. But this is a bat that's you can find all over the US. And again, it's not terribly common in South Florida, but we actually have a couple bat boxes that have single individuals of these that took up residence, and they kind of come and go. When we inspect, they'll be there sometimes, and other times they won't. And then this one, again, not a very imaginative name, evening bat. I think you see all bats in the evening, right? But these guys, we actually have a subspecies down the extreme tip of Florida that's a resident kind of more tropical variant of the subspecies of the evening bat. But these guys are kind of small, but they will form large colonies. So they can get up to many dozens of them in a roof setting, or in a bat box, or in some loose bark or a cavity. We just don't see these guys down, except in down into the Florida Keys. They don't venture down that far. And then this bat is the most common bat that you're going to see in Florida. It's the most abundant and common in urban areas too, but they're also in natural areas. And you can see their range goes all the way across the southern part of the US. And this is in Florida, we call it the Brazilian free-tailed bat, Tiderida brasiliensis. So the scientific name is brasiliensis. If you're in the western part of the country, they'll call it the Mexican free-tailed bat. This is the same bat that you see images of, if you've ever seen in Austin and stuff, where they have like the bridge with all the bats coming out, or Bracken Cave, where there's millions of bats coming out. It's this species. It's the same one. So it can have gigantic colonies. These are ones that love to go under Spanish tile at people's homes. And one thing that gives all the other bats a bad name is the males have this little stinky gland on them, and they like to rub that on their roost areas, and people can smell that. And some people don't like the smell, the musky smell of the males. They'll often think it's the guano and it's just because bats smell, but it's actually not. Most of the bats don't have any smell that you would detect. It's just these male Brazilian free-tailed bats that like to roost in structures, especially artificial structures in the city, and people smell them, and it's often a dead giveaway for us if people describe they have bats and they said they smell them. We usually know which species exactly they're talking about. And then this is a newcomer. So this is a Caribbean species that has naturally expanded its home range. It showed up in Key West in the early 90s, and then moved its way up through the 2000s, up to around Marathon, and then now has ventured all the way up Key Largo, and we've detected it on the mainland. So it has slowly expanded its range, and it's called the Velvety Free-tailed Bat. So it looks a little like the Brazilian free-tailed bat, but it's a little larger than them, and it doesn't have the wrinkled lips. It has a nice smooth kind of face on it. And these guys will often be the first bats that you see. They're crepuscular, so they'll actually fly around when there's still a little bit of light outside. They're one of the first ones to go out, so they go out to exploit some of the insects before the other bats do. And so they're common to see flying around while there's still light in the sky a little bit. And they're very versatile on where they can roost. And then we have this very special bat called the Florida Bonneted Bat. So this is the federally endangered species that's just found in South Florida. I mean, it's ours. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world except in South Florida. It has the most limited geographic range out of any bat species, in the U.S. and threatened ones. It became listed in about 2013. At the time, there was estimated to only be about 1,000 individuals. They form very small colonies. They're our largest bat, so they're about 6 inches long on the body, and their wingspan can be up to 20. That's pretty wide, but they have very long, skinny wings, narrow wings, and those wings tell us a lot about their behavior in hunting. Most of the other bats down here have very wide wings, and they're made for making very sharp, agile turns as they're chasing after insects. But the Florida Bonneted Bat is made to go at high altitude and very high speed. So you think of all the other bats down here, they're kind of like moths. They can fly around and you could see them, spin in a small area. And then if they're moths, the Florida Bonneted Bat is built as a jet airplane. They are just made to go straight, fast in a straight line. And so it kind of changes where they're able to go find food too, because they have to have big, wide open areas to look for things. And because they're a big bat, they like big food items. So they're looking for that prize where they can zoom in at super high speed and nab their prey that they want. So they've only been found in about 10 South Florida counties, and we're really just learning more about the details of their diet, where they roost, and what kind of areas they like to forage. We've really just had a lot discovered in the last 7 to 8 years. In 2006, there was only one known roost for the species in all of its range, and that was in Fort Myers. And now in Miami-Dade County, we have 32 known roosts alone that we've been able to find. So potential lifespan too, they're long-lived. People tend to think of, most small mammals only live a couple years, like mice and rats. They only live 2 to 3 years or so. These guys can live 10 to 20 years, which is very unusual for a small body-sized mammal. But that also means slow reproductive rate. They may only have 1 or 2 pups an entire season per kind of adult female in these small groups. So it can take, 5 to 10 years maybe for generation time in order for a a pup to survive to a reproductive adult. So that doesn't help, with their recovery. They stay in low numbers because it's very, very low reproductive rate naturally for them because they're so long lived. But they can fly huge distances in a night too, up to 30 miles per night. Now, so the Brazilian free-tailed bat that's closely related to them, closer than the other species, is considered the fastest flying animal in the world, and that's like sustained flight. We know the peregrine falcon can dive up to tremendous speed, but for sustained flight, the Brazilian free-tailed bat can go up to 90 some miles per hour. The Florida Bonneted Bat, like I said, closely related. It's larger and it's designed for even more speed. So we wonder if they could actually be the fastest bat around or the fastest animal around. And until we're able to kind of clock them and figure it out, we just don't know. Another cool thing about this bat is all the other bats, their vocalizations are what we refer to as ultrasonic. So they're above the human hearing range. And you can see on this, at the bottom of it, there's 20 kilohertz is the limit for human hearing. And the Florida Bonneted Bat's call is usually below that into our human hearing range. And so this bat is actually not ultrasonic. Many people, if you are young and if you're female, you can have a better chance of hearing these guys flying around in the sky when they do their calls, when they're echolocating. And they also, which is partly problematic, is they have a year-round breeding season. They don't have a set season like all the other bats. So anytime you have these guys in a structure and you want to do an exclusion, you have to try to figure out whether or not they've got babies in there first. So you have to always consult with U.S. Fish and Wildlife before you do anything if you have Florida Bonneted Bats. So here's a little bit picture kind of visualization of their range. So they are very subtropical. They cannot tolerate cold temperatures. They're a similar story to kind of American crocodiles. They're more of a tropical species that are kind of stuck down here at the end of Florida. They really are limited. They're not able to go further north because of the cold. And so it was just 4 counties that they were known when around the time that they were going to get listed, and now we've discovered them in 10 counties, but they are very spread out in little small pockets. And they seem to be tightly associated in most of the Florida with these certain forest types. But, we've got Everglades National Park, which is this huge amount of space, a national park, but most of that is unusable for these bats because they can't use sawgrass prairies. There's not large pine stands out in the middle of the marshland areas at Everglades National Park. So there isn't actually a lot of usable habitat for them and enough kind of open water that they can fly down and get to. So we don't find them in the heart of the Everglades, actually. They're more on the coastal ridges. And here's kind of where roosts have been found for the species. So even though they've been, seen over 10 counties, this is really where the heart of the populations are. Fort Myers, Babcock Webb Wildlife Management Area, the Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge. There's a population also in Big Cypress. But then in Miami, around Coral Gables, Kendall area, and especially the zoo, are lots and lots of colonies of Florida Bonneted Bats. And then the northernmost is actually at Avon Park Air Force Range, which is a bombing range of all places. But a lot of military property, they have an active area of the property where they do their military exercises. And on the periphery is usually forest and it's protected. And that's where the bats are. And it was actually a woodpecker biologist who was looking for a woodpecker who took this video and got the first ever natural roost of a Florida Bonneted Bat in 2014. So he had a camera system that would look for baby woodpeckers. So he would look in these tree cavities and have the camera pointing down to look for baby woodpeckers. But he attended a bat meeting where we were talking about these guys and that we thought they were associated with woodpecker cavities, and especially in different pine species down here. And he just started turning the camera the other way, looking up every time he was looking in one of these cavities. And sure enough, he ran across, these guys and was able to record them. So the woodpecker that I was talking about, this is the woodpecker, the red cockaded woodpecker, which has been also a federally listed species. And there's been recovery programs for them all over parts of the US where there's still small colonies of these guys. What's so special about this woodpecker is they make cavities in living pine trees. And they prefer pine trees that are like 90 to 100 years old. So really large living pine trees. We don't have many 90 to 100-year-old pine trees left in South Florida. Most of those were logged out. And when that happened, we sort of lost this woodpecker in Miami-Dade too. It's no longer found here, but it's over in Big Cypress National Park still. They have colonies over there. But the live pine trees often withstood the storms a lot better too than any kind of dead pines where you had woodpecker cavities in. So when we lost these guys, we kind of lost probably the natural home for the Florida Bonneted Bat in Miami-Dade County. But you can see where they're found now. And if you think of the other map that I showed you, Fort Myers, Babcock Webb, there's another cluster of red cockaded woodpeckers, and that's also where you find this bat. Up in Avon Park, they have colonies there. Big Cypress, they have colonies there. But you can see Miami-Dade County is totally blank. They're no longer found here, and the bats have had to adapt to living in a different situation. So this is the species, the red-bellied woodpecker that we have down here that's more common in our pine forests, but they only make roosts in dead pine trees. So to think about it, you have to get a pine tree that grows big enough and tall enough, and we don't have many pines left, right? The South Dade slash pine exists mostly in pine rockland. We're down to 1.5% of pine rockland or less. And so you have to wait for one of these pine trees to get big enough, then it has to die, and then a woodpecker has to choose to make a cavity in it, then they make a cavity, and then maybe you would have something that the bats could use. But, you know, dead trees in Florida, wood doesn't last that long, and we end up with things like this happening, right? You have a dead tree, and then a hurricane comes and devastates, you know, some of these forests. We don't have the big old trees to withstand these heavy storms anymore. And so we end up losing a lot of living pines, and then most of the dead pines also go down. And so then we lose Florida Bonneted Bat habitat again. And we're kind of stuck in a cycle now where we just don't have a lot of potential for natural habitat for them anymore. So they start resorting to this. This is was an abandoned mansion in Coral Gables that had a Spanish tile roof. This is actually just one bat flying out of there. I know it looks like two, but that's because the infrared light is giving it a shadow on the building. But they are basically improvising their housing. We say they're kind of, you know, gone through a housing crisis where they have lost all of their natural housing and they're having to improvise. And one thing that they found that they like is Spanish tile. And people often don't know they have colonies there because, like I said, they don't smell, they're very quiet, they're very small colonies, and they're super fast. So unless you're watching that exact spot, right, you know, like 20 minutes after dusk, and you happen to see one fly out really quickly, you're not even going to know they're there, most likely. You can look for signs, though. This is guano. And it can look, and the difference between, you know, we'll see droppings from lots of geckos and lizards, and even small birds, but you can notice the white part on the gecko and lizard poop. That's called urates, and that can help you distinguish between the two. Plus the Florida Bonneted Bat is going to have a lot of insect parts in it that is visible when you look at them, but so can geckos and lizards. But that's a good way to tell them apart, is to look for that white part that you might actually have droppings from bats around. So because these guys are living like in these homes you see in the background, multi-story homes, usually at least 2-story or above, and with Spanish tile, if there's a defect in the Spanish tile somewhere, they might move in. Maybe people don't want to live with bats, you know, maybe they don't want them on their property. And so it sets up a scenario where we've got conflict with this wildlife, right? So we've got this endangered species. We don't want conflict. We want to get ahead of that. So we've been trying to help conserve the bat and solve problems for Miami-Dade County residents. And the map on the left is a series of these artificial roosts that you see in the picture on the right that we installed across Miami-Dade County in areas where we knew the bats were foraging for food every night. So we were hoping that they would find them when they were out foraging and possibly move in. So all the ones that are yellow color on the map are now currently occupied by Florida bonneted bats, and the black ones, they've all been up since 2018, and they currently aren't occupied. But that's a very high success rate, especially when you're targeting a federally endangered bat. And we're very happy that they've moved in. And we thought maybe we wouldn't get the adults move in and maybe we would just get their offspring through the years. They wouldn't want to give up wherever they're roosting now. But we've actually seen both. We've seen whole colonies just decide to move into what we've provided for them, and we've seen lots of pups. And here we inspect these houses every month to make sure that they are in good shape, they stay in good repair, and we look for bats and we count bats and we try to see how many we have. And we were up to about 170 of these bats across Miami-Dade County now, which is the largest known population anywhere across their range. These guys are rare. 170 is a big deal across many different colonies. So we're very happy with this kind of in just a few years to have this much success with them. And we're also thinking of the future. We're looking at things like climate change, and we're looking at different bat box designs. So we started experimenting with bat box designs that we've seen modifications of that we've seen across the world. And we tried to look at ones that maybe are a little healthier. With climate change, we are going to experience more hot days. We've just been setting records lately, but in the summer, hotter days. And actually, we can get more extreme cold days because when you have all this excess energy, it affects the jet stream, and that's where we get these Arctic blasts, right? Or the vortexes in the wintertime. That could have a severe effect on the bats if we're cold too many days in a row. So we looked at these types of bat boxes. These are called rocket boxes, and they have two chambers instead of that single chamber like you saw on that other. And the chambers go all the way around a center pole. So they have inside chambers, outside chambers, and they can choose any side. So if the sun's shining on the box on one side and they want to warm up, they can go to the outside chamber and on that side of the box and really get warm. But if they're too hot, they can go to like the inside chamber on the opposite side of the box and stay cool. They can go to the top where it's warmer or down to the bottom. So we put in these temperature and humidity sensors in there and studied them for about a year. And we actually found that these imitate really like mature natural pine roosts, the same temperature ranges and same temperature kind of buffering capabilities that a natural roost would. And they're much healthier for the bats going into the future. So this is the new bat box design that we're going with, and we're going to replace the others when they wear out to this new design. Also, we want to do acoustic monitoring. So we want to know where are these bats using the county. So we started with about 10 sites in 2019. You can see in here where we just have passive recorders that are recording the bats every night to look at activity in different areas. We've picked up all 8 species of bats in this. This is kind of a heat map that shows how much activity at each one of our monitoring sites, which ones are really getting a lot. And as you can see, Zoo Miami is pretty special. Right in our own backyard, we have an amazing amount of activity at Zoo Miami for the Florida bonneted bat. And Brazilian free-tailed bat, unsurprisingly, is the most common one seen at all sites. But except for Zoo Miami, where it's Florida bonneted bat, this federally endangered bat is the most common species that we detect on our ground. And to show you how much more active Zoo Miami is, this is the number of calls, average calls per night detected at each one of our monitoring locations. So it's several magnitudes higher at some of the big open areas at Zoo Miami compared to some of the other parks where we actually have colonies and known activity. So we expanded our acoustic mapping, and now this is where we have stations all across Miami-Dade County, again, where we're trying to see where our activity and how these bats are using the urban landscape. So how can you help our bats is something, you know, a question I always like to have and I get all the time. How can we help? Well, you can put up a bat house yourself. And now the ones for the Florida Bonneted Bat, we don't encourage on private property, but you can find bat boxes for the Brazilian free-tailed bats, the evening bats, the Velvety Free-tailed bats, the big brown bat, even the Eastern pipistrelle will use bat boxes, the federally endangered one. So that's one thing you can do, and it's easy to put up a bat house in your own yard, put it away kind of in the corner of your yard, and enjoy the benefits. You know, it would be hard to believe what South Florida would be like if we didn't have tens of thousands of these bats cleaning up our skies every night. And it also offsets a lot of pesticide use. So they really are your friends. They're working for us every night cleaning our skies. So I encourage people to give them good homes, you know, or if you're afraid you're going to get bats, you know, in your actual house, or maybe you do have bats in the roof of your house and you need to have the roof repaired, give them an alternative. You know, they are a huge asset to our community. Put up a little bat box somewhere. There's plenty of guides online. I refer people to Bat Conservation International. They have a whole section on bat houses and where you can get them in there. And then the other big thing is don't trim your palm trees in the summer, especially, right? Just leave your palm trees alone. If you have a landscaper does work at your place, tell them not to trim your palm trees. I mean, people don't trim queen palm because you can't reach it. We just seem to continue to trim more the ones that we can reach, and we really should just leave them alone because you're destroying habitat for these bats, and you can especially harm them in the summer. That can cause you know, a lot of mortality or loss of baby bats too for the yellow bat. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But if you have any other question that you think about later that you can't ask here, this is my email at the bottom.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Ridgley.
No problem.